All right, well, super excited to talk to you guys. Network to Code celebrating its 10th year anniversary. I'm sure it feels like it went by incredibly fast, but also incredibly long at the exact same time, living these startup journeys. So, guys, I'm excited to kind of maybe start with you, Jason. Get to a little bit more like the background and nugget of the idea. And also, what I love to ask founders, especially on milestone celebrations, is this what you expected it to be? Is this what you were trying to build? Kind of walk through a little bit of that founding and reflect on where we are now.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, but yeah, thanks for having us, Kyle. Yeah, just to kind of, I guess, jump right in. When I think back to, 10 years ago, 10 plus years ago, I see sort of like the motivation coming from three things that was going on kind of back then. Number one, yeah, I was really close to following the trends that were happening in the industry. When I look at back 2011, 12, 13, there was so much, venture money going into networking startups out of the valley. And the more that I met a lot of those folks and even some of the investors, sort of like recognizing like there was gaps, right? Rather than transforming networking, sort of like there was a lack of focus in operational models, right? Number two is around the same time, right? It's kind of all the perfect storm for me. It was looking at like the early application of software and DevOps applied to networking, right? There's some aha moments looking at like the puppets and the chefs and the Ansibles and newer APIs. And really number three for me is sort of when I look back at like my career, pre-network to code, I spent a career in technical sales, and we had a lot of John was a part of that too, right? We had a lot of good celebrations on a lot of good deals, and a lot of them were on product resale. Like there were some services, but there was a lot of product resale. And it was like you taking a step back to think about these trends. How are our customers actually adopting all this technology in a more consumable way? And so I think to me, sort of like the writing was on the wall and saying there does need to be this sort of newer breed or a newer kind of company that's a bit more focused on helping customers transform their operational models, i.e. through network automation. And that was kind of, the lead up to, starting the business.
How organic was it for you to like start hiring people and realizing that the demand was there? And was that like you building it first, or was that client pull, or like how do you think about like the really beginnings of team building and getting the scale going?
Yeah, the real beginning was it was out there. Like the first couple customers were OEMs and vendors. And it was a combination of building some of the very first Ansible integrations, DevOps tooling integrations for some vendors. There's a handful of those, and then also building some content for vendors. I feel like it kind of in all of those, I do feel like it was kind of like the first one was sort of being pulled towards them. After that, it was selling the vision of DevOps for networking to say, hey, you know what,
Right.
Ansible is going to be doing well. Like you need to have sort of a story here. And yeah, I would say probably by project number two, it was evident, there was enough revenue, right, to bring on sort of some part-time contractor help. And from there, sort of, confidence grew a little bit, but it was nice that they were vendors in the sense of like not supporting production networks that early because like the criticality, if it's building an integration or building train, like the risk is a lot lower. So it kind of worked out where in those early years, we were building the integrations that customers would end up using. So it's kind of like early on in the life cycle of just the software and the transformation that was happening.
Yeah, that's great. And John, you guys obviously have a relationship. So why don't you guys talk a little bit about your relationship that predated the company and how you developed rapport and trust, and then walk a little bit through you watching Jason doing this in the very beginning, and then like when you kind of decided to
Hmm.
come on in and be a big part of this as CEO.
Yeah, sure, sure. I've known Jason for 25 years now, probably a little bit more. So a long, long time. And Jason and I actually went to college together, and that's where we first met. And then we followed a very similar path. I started my career at Cisco, and as a sales engineer, and Jason was soon at Cisco there. And then I made a transition over to a startup company, a VAR national solution provider, that we were very successful in growing the business from zero to hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's when I had the opportunity to bring Jason on board and work with him to really lead our networking solutions practice. And we were then acquired by a larger solution provider, and Jason moved on to start Network to Code. Um, and we had a number of conversations, and I remember, you know, the passion that he had, and revisiting the software development days from our college days, and he had this passion around automation. And decided to go out and start Network to Code, and that was uh, fantastic to see. Right, it takes obviously um, uh, a lot of passion and confidence in especially in a newer emerging technology like network automation. And you know, Jason probably talk about it, but he really found an outlet in community, right? And that's like how Network to Code really came to be. It's through the blog posts and the sharing of content and sharing of open source, and just really building this community. I had the opportunity to take a year plus off and spend time with my family while I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I had been following Jason along the way. And when we sat down in 2017, I was just really, really intrigued by his focus on community, because that was new to me. And after just doing some research, I could see this growing momentum amongst these like-minded individuals that really believed that network operations could be transformed through a software centric approach and through a DevOps philosophy, and applying everything that's been applied to the system side of the house to the network from an operations standpoint. And that was growing and building. And then Jason started rattling off some of his customers, the largest companies in the world. And I was like, wow, this is, this has some legs. So, I ended up joining almost 7 years now. So it's really, really exciting to be here.
Just gonna
So
quick comment
yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to make. Yeah, I was going to just mention on community. I think it's so important, right? When you look at sort of like the outlet here, talking about startups. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like looking back, I've said over the years, and I would say, right, wrong, and different, being young and naive, and there's sort of like there wasn't the business plan 10, 11 years ago, right? It really was sort of. I always kind of come back to doing what the industry needed and what us as kind of like technical I would say the technically inclined needed as an outlet. So there was
Yeah.
many things back then that were done because like they were flat out needed, and they ended up being like really fundamental and foundational. I would say for the business, and I'll even say like the industry. I point that out now because you look at sort of from blogs to podcasts to even influencers that like from day one, like the motivation is to somehow find a way to commercialize it. And a lot of those things, like it was probably a little bit secondary. It's like, what, we're gonna help, right? Because I've
Yeah.
lived the pain for 20 years. We're gonna help, and good things happen. So it's kind of nice looking back that stars did align a little bit, right, over the years.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I mean, the most authentic, companies in the end, many start with, just trying to give back and having some altruistic approach based on their expertise and experience. And I think that's definitely true of the Network to Code story. And obviously, that purity, right, and that authenticity is what has driven your growth and sustained growth and legitimacy into the enterprise. Like, there's so much of what's required for especially a deeper technology company to be actually legit is that it's a bottoms up. Even if you're selling tops down, obviously the practitioners need to believe in the brand that their company's partnering with and the tooling that they're meant to leverage. So I think that's absolutely spot on. That's something we talk a lot about in just startup SaaS scaling. Just put a lot out there to the world and it'll come back around, right? It can't all be like, what's the call to action and how do you drive leads every minute, every day, and obsessing all the time on the analytics of your go-to-market funnel. Obviously, you need to do that too, but I truly do believe in that community brand, playing the long game. Speaking of the long game, one thing I couldn't help but wonder is while you guys were drinking beers in college, I mean, were you talking about like sports and girls, or were you talking about network automation? Like let's be honest. Take it back. Take me back a little bit to kind of your undergrad and your degree, and you know, because I went to a business school with and I played football, right? And it was funny. There were certain folks who, if I even look back now, right, and like it's sure a little bit might be revisionist history, but there were certain folks who I felt like took the school and the internships and the initial career seriously, and there's folks that didn't, right? And now here we all are, 20 years into our careers or so, or 25 years into our careers, and I actually think there's a corollary. A lot of people had to try to play catch up, while others kind of understood that they had an interest in an area or a sector, and maybe a competency and a peer group around them to help on a rising tides, all that. I mean, realizing you probably weren't playing flip cup talking about network automation, I get that, but like walk a little bit about like the kind of like how like people kind of find each other and stay connected in their careers, and how important that is to then go build a startup knowing that you
Mhm.
have that sort of circle of trust.
Yeah, maybe I'll give it like a few minutes and pass it over to John. If I look back, right, John was a few years ahead of me, and I guess I was fortunate enough to have to pledge the same fraternity as John.
What
And
university were you guys at? Just to give
yeah,
them a
we were at
shout here.
Stevens, Hoboken, New Jersey, is engineering school, right, in Hoboken.
Cool. Yep.
But yeah, pledged fraternity, and fortunate enough to, John was one of my pledge masters back back then,
A little
and so
hazing.
I
yeah, but
still am today.
yeah, yeah, and kind of fast forward even just like a few months, I would say, like for I guess for like for me and John, and probably the intersection of like networking, the way what happened like for me was like my second year of school. I think John had just went to Cisco, but the second year, sort of like coincidentally, I came back from Christmas break. A neighbor down in our house, in the house, gave had like the Cisco study guide. I'm like, all right, I'll take a look at it. So meanwhile, I'm maybe 19, 20 years old, and in college, not probably like the biggest reader, but I read a few pages of that book, and like it sounds weird, but I just remembered every word that I read like by the page, and it just sort of like felt a connection towards networking at a young age. And I would say knowing it's sort of my perspective, knowing John went to Cisco and knowing I'm reading this book, like there was that natural of always like trying to stay in touch, come visit. He was in Hoboken after he graduated, come back to the house, sort of, then trying to, shoot the shit a little bit, and then kind of fast forward a year or two. Me and another guy in the house has sort of like bought 3 or 4 Cisco routers, trying to network them up and trying to learn a little bit. And I would say, I was one of the fortunate ones that early in college kind of knew that networking path, like the career that I wanted to go have, that not many probably are fortunate enough to know that, that early. And then from there, yeah, we stayed in touch quite a bit, and ultimately went to Cisco, following a similar path as John alluded to.
Yeah, yeah. And I took the 5-year route for college, where
There you go.
yeah, computer science was my worst
You needed the
subject.
red shirt. You had the
Yeah,
red shirt.
yeah, I
Yeah,
had the
yeah,
red
yeah.
shirt.
Red shirt.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes. Meanwhile, Jason was the baseball player. I did go out and play fall ball for 1 year, but once I heard that the team had to go on spring break together, right, versus with my fraternity brothers in Cancun and party there, I decided that baseball's not for me. But yeah, I was fortunate to have a couple of internships where I was able to experience the life of a network engineer at the time, and just really gravitated to the technology, the work, and the types of folks that I was able to work with, and I had 2 summers working at Lehman Brothers at the time, and it was just a great experience, and I knew that's what I wanted to get into, and was able to land a job at Cisco, which really fortunate to have had that opportunity.
Just before
One
the
thing,
crisis, by the
yeah,
way. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd love to kind of shift a little bit to, just kind of relevant to the overall like company's industry. I can remember very early in my career going to a data center for the first time, right? Like going into the bowels of the giant data centers and walking around and being just so reminded. This is like the beginning of like the no software Salesforce movement and the subscription SaaS business model. And back then it was a lot of like managed hosting was emerging, and it wasn't quite called cloud computing yet, but it was like the beginnings of that. And just always being reminded, especially as we were building and scaling Dyn, and then as we sold our company Dyn to Oracle, always grounding myself in that this gets back to the physical, at some point. And this whole internet thing we're talking about always gets back to the physical. And I remember being told by my founding CTO at Dyn, do not touch anything, right? To me, the CRO, like, do not touch anything when we go in there. If you touch anything, I'll kill you. You'll take down our network, all these sorts of things. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think in the role that like network automation has entirely changed, like the sort of like, yeah, sure, you got to wire up your servers and your routers and your switches, and you need to set it all up. But I can remember the days of like remote hands, and like, I know it still exists, but there's so much more that's now done through open source and software and automation. Just talk through that kind of like evolution to like the first time you thought of like networking to what like the network automation has gone, and then where maybe it might go from here.
Yeah. When I think back again, when I was going back to my first internship, it was, within 3 months, sort of found myself like doing networking there. And I guess probably similar to what you're describing, kind of walking into a data center. The one that I walked into was probably 100, 50 racks or so. And it was loud. There's mainframes in there. Like there's like these, what they call it, these big Cisco routers, and just trying to like make sense of it all. So yeah, it was a bit, it was a bit overwhelming to understand kind of how all those systems were communicating, with
Yep.
the time, right? I found it interesting. And, what I was doing day to day was what even to today, a lot of network engineers are still, you're logging into these devices manually, right? And so really for years, it was sort of like that's all I knew, right? This was out on a campus that had a data center. It's like 2 or 3 large buildings, 20 or 30 wiring closets, and you're sort of like memorizing IP addresses, like what the to like log in and troubleshoot and do all these things. And when you're especially really maybe at any age, but I was young, and you sort of like prided yourself on like your memory, and either to know those IP addresses and the commands to go execute and troubleshoot. And I do remember though, back then, this is very early 2000s, let's just say 2001, 2, 3, like in that range, trying to Google like things around like scripting for networking,
Right.
and could never find anything. Every once in a while, I would hear a peer that had, that they were probably older than I was at the time. Like they would mention the word template or something or a script, and I would always like perk up. Oh, like, can I see that? And it was always like a Word document template, like
Yeah.
procedural,
Yeah.
like replace this third octet with this integer, when it's like this type of network service. I'm like, I'm let down again, like no real software. And then it was sort of, then the more progressive, I would say, we're finding ways. Like back then, it was a little bit of Bash, Perl, and so forth. But I would say, yeah, for me personally, I'll just say it was in the early 2010s when you're kind of going back to the founding story, where Cisco had released like their first SDK for networking. DevOps was emerging, and I was like, wow, this is going to be transformational. And then it kind of just connected the dots a little bit, and I was at my last job still and doing some demos of like Python to customers and saw some of the eye rolling from customers like, all right, like there's going to be a long journey here, and there's got to be better interfaces for customers, right? Raw code
Yep.
isn't going to do it. That's kind of comes full circle from the manual networking to thinking about doing things better but sticking with manual for decades as most did. And then finally, when it came to life, back in the early 2010s, I will say, another quick aside, that I haven't said that much in those years, like knowing what was happening. I'm like, look, I did take some computer science in high school. College, honestly,
Yeah.
no, I can't even say it's college. It was high school. But what I'll say is in 2011 or 12, I'm like, I have to learn this somehow.
Yeah.
And I literally didn't know how. So I'm like, what can I do? Like, how do I work smarter here? And again, we mentioned we were in a fraternity. I went on LinkedIn. I found a guy in that house. At the time, he was probably, I just said, hey, this is who I am. Is there anybody in the house that could help me, learn, relearn how I would get back into software or get into software. And yeah, luckily, again, I was trying to pay work study rates, right, in
Yep.
college, reasonable, and also provide them the insight to the industry. And then we met in the Stevens Library for like 3 hours every Wednesday night. And yeah, they didn't want to learn about industry. They just wanted
Yep.
a few bucks. So I did that for really a few months. And then as I progressed in my day job, kind of met this sort of like nighttime study. Yeah, from there it was sort of like exponential growth in terms of like the application to networking.
Yeah.
And now as a business, yeah, clearly, we've been evolving for the past 11 years since, or 12, kind of 10 plus
Yeah. Yeah.
since.
I think there's something just amazing to me, and shifting gears a little bit to just like startup building and scaling, and that like non-linear road that we all take. There's something incredibly amazing to me about like those Genesis stories, because I think what's lost, especially a decade in, is that the best companies in the world are like are building themselves not on the playbooks of others. It's not like it's charting a new course and finding some green field. And I always tell people, like, back to the beginnings of my career and similar to you guys, like there wasn't like this SaaS like landscape and startup landscape that exists now, right? It's like it's easy to look at it without context to say, like, back then there wasn't the podcasts and the blogs and the books and the success stories and the public comps. And you think of like networking back then, like the public comps were hardware, right?
Mhm.
Or telcos or carriers or these types of things, right? They weren't anything to do with like software defined networking, or DevOps wasn't even a term until the early 2010s, probably into the middle there, right? So I think it's just a very interesting reality of startup building. Is it's easy to look back and say, oh yeah, you were on that revolution and network automation became huge, and all these different players emerged, but they didn't exist then. And if they did, they were tiny, and we didn't know them, and you discovered them randomly through community. And that's just the way the evolution story goes, right? So talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about the startup journey. Let's switch away from like the straight network automation industry, and get a little bit more to like, the good, the bad, the ugly of building, and how that kind of led you here.
John, do you want to take some of that?
Yeah, John, why don't you start? Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, the biggest thing with just the startup space is feeling comfortable being uncomfortable. It's a matter of just not knowing, right, where it's going to go, right, and that really drives, to me, entrepreneurs, right. That's kind of
Yeah.
what drives them, right. It's like I don't know what's ahead, right, but I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to evolve, and that is really exciting. We we used to say, when I first started, that this is new to all of us, right? The business. This first time I'm a
Yeah.
CEO, right? It's the first time Jason started a business. The technology is brand new. It's emerging out there, and we're going to figure it out, right? We're going to face these challenges head on and come up with solutions and grow and evolve. When I first came on board, we were all wearing multiple hats, right? As a CEO, I was the head of finance. I was the
Right.
tax guy, the lawyer, the HR administration, sales, marketing, and Jason was the same, right?
Yep.
So we were all wearing multiple hats. We knew what we didn't know, and then we knew how to go and find the answers and find the help that we needed. So you have to be really willing to enter, the unknown and enjoy that.
Yeah.
And we did.
I have this line where I say, like, if only we could Rip Van Winkle ourselves to sleep and wake up in 10, 20 years and see how it all went. It's a very, it's this very like, everything's a sort of mirage, right? And you kind of don't know where it's all going to go, and you need to maintain high conviction.
Yeah.
There's like an anxiety to it all where it like sometimes is
Yeah.
overwhelming and other times it fades to the background, but it's always there, right? I think secondly, you made a great point around the need to be like a CXO in the early stages of
Hmm.
company building, and I think that's actually lost on many people who have come from like more corporate careers or
Yeah.
who even joined startups in leadership roles that were already well established. Is that in those companies that are further along or bigger, it's actually like the more narrow you get, the more valuable you become, right? And in the earlier days, it's really about being an executive. Like the de facto, if you're a CTO, is obviously technology, or if you're a CFO, finance. Like that's obvious. That's like table stakes. That's like what you have to be. But without operating and being able to help and plug in everywhere else, companies don't succeed and
Yeah.
thrive, right? So
That's right.
I think that's a very, very, very key point. And I think it's also hard during scaling and growth, though, to also then you need to hire people who are those
Yeah,
functional
you
experts in the
have to do
specific
it at the
domain.
right time. You have to know when to do it, right? And that's a key piece. Timing is so important to it all, right? To scale the business.
And it's not just adding functional experts. They also need to fit in culturally and have the
Yeah.
startup DNA
Yep.
and be hired at the right time and space. And that's a tricky thing, and we'll get to it in a little bit. But once you raise money and you bring in investors and they have points of view and opinions on your organization and how you've architected it's important to just stay true to that. Like, this is the type of company we're building. These are the types of people we want to hire and go to battle with, right?
Yeah.
Jason, talk a little bit about that, like not non-linear path and just sort of like some of the learnings along the way.
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's similar. I stand by sort of like the comfort of not knowing, and so kind of doubling down on that a little bit, and maybe some of the learnings is like recognizing like there isn't one answer, right? I know for many things when I first start thinking about or recognizing we can do better in an area, or there's one answer, and then I would say even recommendations, right? I think external advisors are great. um, getting external feedback from those that have again maybe been in smaller organizations, larger organizations, like you do recognize like there isn't one answer.
Yep.
So yeah, I would say even a good example for us is we didn't have software a couple years ago, and now we have multiple agile teams running full on
Right.
methodologies like sprint reviews and retros and all these things. And yeah, now I would say as a business, we try to, I would say, embody agile to its finest, in the sense of, look, we have to be comfortable in not knowing, but also be striving for the continuous improvement, right?
Yep.
If we're kind of going up and to the right and improving processes, improving product, improving teams, then we have to be okay doing that, because we continue to hire, right? I would say better and better talent, better and better experience, and it's just been, it's definitely been a roller coaster. And, I think those who have been here, recognize the opportunity, right? And embrace the unknown. But I think for me, it's kind of, there isn't one answer, right? You got to
Yeah.
find the one, the answer for your business and for your team and your culture, because you can get feedback from a culture that I talk to people that, like, other organizations don't even whisper the word culture internally.
Yep.
There's no culture here. Like there's culture. So it's just, a lot more thought around how we do things.
Yeah, I mean, one thing obviously in our partnership is like, there's an interesting dynamic in startups, especially subscription startups, in that like everything needs to be philosophically aligned in unison, right, across the entire organization, right? Like, so a lot of the methodologies and philosophies of like agile development, automation, team structures, like those principles that exists a lot in the technology side of the companies, or the way that also a sales and marketing side of a company needs to be operating and iterating and scaling, and then vice versa. Like in those worlds, you have quotas and commissions and goals and metrics and very data driven. That also needs to run back to the product and the product roadmap and product execution and features and
Mhm.
functions and feeds and speeds that are being developed, right? And so I always find that like the best companies have found that like simpatico where the left foot and the right foot know what they're doing, right? Everything from R&D to go to market to G&A are all aligned around the same philosophies and same goals. Now, it doesn't always mean they're all perfectly aligned at the same time, right? And in most successful companies, there's times when the go-to-markets are the strength of the company or the community is the strength of the company. Other times, it's the technology catches up and runs past that. Other times, it's the business is lagging
Mhm.
behind the financial metrics, the reporting, the capital strategy. Trying to find balance in all those things is what makes companies sustain their growth and reach inevitable mountaintops of exits or IPOs or things like that.
Yeah.
When you guys think about now, like in the journey, like like where do you see this, right? Like, and I don't mean in the networking industry. I kind of think like the network to code, like when you try to flash out, if we're sitting here and 2034, and don't say retired, that's the cop out, like but we're sitting here in 2034, where do you see this impact? Is it working with more brands? Is it more Fortune 500s? Is it more global reach? Is it a cultivated community? Talk a little bit about your open source and Autobot and that realm, like if it all goes right, where do you kind of see it 10 years out?
Yeah, I'll start, Jason. You could
Mhm.
jump in. I I believe we're just scratching the surface, right, with what we're doing today, right? We have a solid customer base now of global enterprise organizations, um, but we're just scratching the surface. Um, 10 years from now, right? We can be truly global in any type of company, any size company, um, where we can, the goal would be to ease that barrier of entry and make the technology accessible to any type of organization. Certainly AI is going to have a real big part in that. But my, my feeling is that we can automate any network in the world. And that's what we're going to strive to do, right? So right now we're starting with, typical enterprise organizations. There are a handful of smaller companies out there leveraging network automation and DevOps. But we really, really believe that we're just scratching the surface and the market opportunity is huge for us. So our goal would be to take it down market, make the technology and make network to code solution accessible to any type of organization.
Love that.
Yeah, just to add on. Yeah, definitely. Obviously, second a lot of that. Think about it. Growing our customer base. Going mid market, down market. But I also think about it, kind of bringing it back to the community in the sense of like looking back over the last 10 or 20 years. Like if we're 10 years into the future, and some of the things that still find exciting even from this week. You sort of go to an event and you see how the feedback from people that maybe weren't a customer but have used some of the things we put out there, and
Right.
call it it could be software, it could be book, could be what have you. And so I look at it as just sort of like it's like network to code is just synonymous with in networking, right? We talk about it being synonymous in network automation. Yeah, 10 years from now it's in networking, right?
Yeah.
Kind of even over the years, sort of like we've already had impact in like third world countries. Again, not customers, but like they have networks. They're small telcos.
Right.
We've had, again, like we've had so many inbounds, right? In the sense of, can you help with a little bit of training? Maybe send a student here and there, or like, hey, we read this book. Can you help a little bit? And so I think like the global. I look when I think about 10 years from now, even now, right? It's just sort of like so grateful to, and I think it's just amazing to have that literally global impact that I think if
Yeah.
we've done engagements all over the world, we can go to a conference in Singapore and
Yeah.
they've probably heard network
Yeah.
code or used some of our software, which I just find totally,
It's amazing.
totally awesome.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
it's
that's because
amazing. Yeah.
yeah,
Good.
it's because we stayed true to our roots
Right.
and community. It's and we're going to continue to stay true to those roots. It's what we give back to the community is helping to grow the community and making that knowledge available, accessible to anybody in the world.
Well, listen, I have the benefits of being removed from a company that had Dyn that had a great community and had 15 million users globally. And to this day, I'm now 7 years out of selling Dyn to Oracle and 5 years out of Oracle. And to this day, the kind of pride and community connection that like creates on a global level is just unbelievable. And it's actually like one of the reasons I built York IE was try to replicate that more on the company building side, the investing side. Is there a new way to provide capability, resources, support, create a one-stop resource and capital partner for private companies? Because I feel like so often, the best companies in the world are like deep technologies, and that's great, that's wonderful. But there's a lot of business folks out there who are looking for help and community and a safe space and a warm blanket around them. And I hope to kind of replicate that. But there's nothing better than the kind of deep, true community that you guys have cultivated. It's what we had at Dyn, and again, far removed from it persists, right? It like kind of lives on in the story of the internet and the global technology space that we're all living and working in. Can you guys just talk briefly, and then we'll wrap on just our partnership a little bit, and then like how partnerships, and Jason, you mentioned advisors being valuable,
Mm-hmm.
to have kind of third party perspective, unbiased, unvarnished
Yeah.
opinions on what you're doing. But yeah, just talk a little bit about some of that. Yeah.
That was a softball.
Yeah, there's a softball. Yeah.
But yeah, I'll go first there. But yeah, look, when I think back over the last couple of years, yeah, I do think I don't know if your team realizes it too, but when we first engaged, like there was a bit around the kind of like messaging and hierarchy and so forth, and there's a phrase that's paramount to how we think about ourselves, which is around like data driven network automation, and I think like that I credit York for that. I'm pretty sure it was York, but in the sense like our early engagement was like
we'll take the credit. Together
yeah,
we did it. As long as
yeah,
as long as we're a foot. No,
yeah, hearing us talk about sort of like what we do, when you're in it, right, it is hard to take a step back to kind of think about some of those like punchy solutions.
Backlines, yeah.
Sort of, yeah. And so that for me is probably it is up there. But I think about even early engagement, like drumbeat marketing. I think you first talked about it, kind of Google it, and it's like literally York is like the first response around like drumbeat, which is kind of cool in the sense of like building out like the processes around thinking about go to market and channeling, not just sort of big announcement here. It's like, hey, you got to stitch these things together, press release, blog, all these things, and but yeah, it's been, and I would just say in general, yeah, having kind of external advisors, right, in given domains like go to market and so forth, and has been tremendous. There's been other projects John can allude to, CRM and so forth, probably even larger, probably business impact, right, day to day. But he can kind of share some of that too.
Yeah, no, I think just at a high level, working with York, having the ability to just pick up the phone and call you, Kyle, and just bounce ideas off of you, see what you're seeing out in the industry, and get some ideas and being able to share ideas, I think is important. So to establish that relationship is first and foremost. I think that is key, right? And then there's all of the services that your team can provide and the expertise that they can provide, maybe in a certain area like go to market, right? When we made that transition to our CRM and marketing automation platform, right? That was new to us, right? And that was a
Yeah,
big overhaul, right? And you certainly helped simplify that and took a lot off of our plate, right? And we're in there every day, and
right.
it's been tremendous. But as Jason mentioned, early days was, hey, how do we structure our messaging, right? We had
Yeah,
countless conversations, right? And, wrote documents. This is our thought process here. And just having someone to help structure that messaging hierarchy for us that we still leverage today, that ultimately became the foundation for our website that York helped us
yep.
with, right? And it's critical. So, you're really able at the right point in time to help us through that challenge.
Yeah, I love that. I think the couple takeaways I have on that is like the relationship and the sort of trust. We were introduced through your lead investor, so there could be perception there that we're their henchmen and we're coming in to look at you from a critical eye. And I think the only way that our business model of advisory as a service works is if we develop the trust and
Yeah,
relationship and respect with the actual operators grinding, working their asses off every day in the company. And then you're right, like being able there to be like a strategic, lens to tell you also like what matters and what doesn't. Like that's
yeah,
the operational expertise and the fact that we just see hundreds and hundreds and thousands of companies and we study it every day, right? Because it's like that perspective a lot of times say that doesn't really matter, that doesn't really matter, that doesn't really matter, that matters, that matters, that matters. Provide the strategic guidance, but then also to have a lot of resources to actually do stuff, right? I find a
hmm,
lot of advisory firms or management consultancies can give you all the great ideas, but they can't
yes,
actually execute transactionally or tactically on anything. And
that's
at the end
right.
of the day, in startups, it's just way too much to do. So try to build a firm that's kind of an operating extension with the strategic guidance
Yeah,
available along the way is important. So yeah, I love that. That's cool. Well, thanks, guys. I mean, really appreciate the partnership. We're really happy for you, obviously, and certainly for what's to come. I agree with you just from the standpoint of getting to know the team and the industry that you really are just scratching the surface. And the more you can connect that kind of like bottoms up community with the enterprise, kind of Fortune 500 brands and logos and engagements you have, is really, really the future and wish you the best.
great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle, and congratulations on all your success making the
Thank
Inc.
you.
5000, all of your portfolio
Yeah,
companies
you
that are
too.
doing
Let's
well.
go.
Congrats. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
exciting. Let's
Yeah.
go get it.
Let's do it.
Thank you. Hey, man, what's Rip Van Winkle to the future, right? It's where it's all gonna work, right? Let's go,
Yeah, man.
guys.
All
I
right.
love
Take
it.
care.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Kyle.
See ya.